Have you ever noticed how building wealth feels impossibly slow at first? Like you're pushing a boulder uphill with barely any progress to show for it, but then suddenly everything seems to accelerate and your money starts growing faster than you ever imagined possible. This phenomenon isn't just in your head, and it's not some kind of motivational myth designed to keep you grinding through the early years of saving, because there's actually hard math and psychology behind why the journey to your first $100,000 feels completely different from everything that comes after. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner and one of the most respected investors in history, famously said that the first 100,000 is the hardest, and he wasn't just talking about the discipline required to save that much money, but rather about the mathematical reality of how compound interest actually works in practice. Most people give up on their financial goals long before they reach this critical milestone because they don't understand that wealth accumulation isn't linear, it's exponential, and the early years are always going to feel like you're getting nowhere despite doing everything right. According to research from Fidelity Investments, the average American household has only around $65,000 saved across all their retirement accounts, which means that most people never actually experience the magic that happens once you cross that $100,000 threshold. The psychological burden of those early years is real and crushing because you're making sacrifices, cutting back on things you enjoy, automating your savings, and yet when you check your account balance, it barely seems to move from month to month. You might save $500 this month and watch your balance go from $10,000 to $10,500, which feels like nothing when you're still decades away from retirement and you're comparing yourself to people on social media who seem to have everything figured out already. But here's what nobody tells you about wealth building until you experience it yourself. The game completely changes once you have a substantial base of capital working for you. Because at that point, you're no longer just saving your way to wealth, you're actually investing your way there, and your money is making money while you sleep. Let's break down the mathematics of why $100,000 is such a pivotal number and why everything before it feels like you're running on a treadmill going nowhere. If you're earning a 10% annual return on your investments, which is roughly the historical average of the stock market over the long term, then with $10,000 invested, you're making about $1,000 per year from your returns alone. And that probably doesn't feel life-changing when you're also trying to contribute from your paycheck every month. But once you hit $100,000 invested at that same 10% return, you're now generating $10,000 annually, just from investment growth, which might be more than you're able to contribute from your actual income depending on your salary and expenses. That's the inflection point where your money starts working harder than you do. And it's why so many personal finance experts obsess over this particular milestone, even though it sounds arbitrary at first. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances reveals that the median net worth for American households under 35 years old is only around $14,000, which includes everything they own minus everything they owe. So the vast majority of people are nowhere near experiencing this wealth acceleration effect. The brutal truth is that getting to 100,000 requires an almost unreasonable level of consistency and delayed gratification during a phase of life when you're probably also dealing with student loans, trying to advance your career, maybe starting a family and watching everyone around you spend money on experiences and possessions that you're forcing yourself to skip. This is precisely why so many people fail to build wealth, not because they don't understand the concept of saving and investing, but because they give up during those grueling early years when progress feels invisible and the payoff seems impossibly far away. The psychological warfare that happens in your mind during the journey to $100,000 cannot be overstated, because you're essentially fighting against every instinct that evolution gave you to seek immediate rewards and avoid delayed gratification. And modern consumer culture is specifically designed to exploit these weaknesses and convince you that you deserve to treat yourself right now instead of investing in a future that feels abstract and uncertain. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household spends over $60,000 per year, which means that for most people, saving even 20% of their income requires making choices that feel socially isolating and financially restrictive compared to their peer group. You start noticing how much money your friends spend on restaurants, vacations, new cars, and upgraded apartments. And there's this constant voice in your head questioning whether you're missing out on life by being so focused on building wealth for some distant future version of yourself. The compound interest charts and retirement calculators all show beautiful exponential curves that eventually shoot up toward the sky. But when you're living through year 3 or year 5 of consistent saving and your account balance is still in the $20,000 or $30,000 range, those charts feel like fantasy rather than reality. Here's what makes the pre-100,000 phase so uniquely challenging from a mathematical standpoint. Your contributions from earned income represent almost the entirety of your wealth growth, and the investment returns, while important, are still relatively small in absolute dollar terms, even if the percentage gains look impressive. If you manage to save and invest $15,000 in a year, and your existing investments grow by 10% on a $30,000 base, you're adding $15,000 from savings and $3,000 from returns, which means your effort and sacrifice are still doing 83% of the heavy lifting. But fast forward to when you have $200,000 invested, and suddenly that same 10% return generates $20,000 in growth, which now exceeds what many people can actually save from their paychecks in a single year. And this is when wealth building starts to feel less like punishment and more like momentum. The Schwab Modern Wealth Survey found that Americans believe they need about $2.2 million to be considered wealthy, but the journey to that number becomes exponentially faster once you've established that initial foundation of capital that can compound aggressively over time. One of the most demoralizing aspects of the early accumulation phase is watching your net worth get derailed by unexpected expenses, market downturns, or necessary life purchases like replacing a broken car or covering medical bills. Because when your entire net worth is only $25,000, a $5,000 emergency represents 20% of everything you've worked for disappearing in an instant. This volatility and vulnerability makes it incredibly difficult to maintain faith in the process, especially when the financial influencers and investing gurus online make it sound like building wealth is simple and straightforward when you just follow their system. The reality that nobody wants to acknowledge is that reaching $100,000 invested requires most people to spend somewhere between 7 and 12 years of extremely disciplined saving and investing, assuming they're starting from zero and contributing realistic amounts from a median income, and that timeline assumes no major financial setbacks or life disruptions along the way. Research from Vanguard shows that the average retirement account balance grows most significantly during the final 15 years before retirement, not because people suddenly start saving more aggressively at age 50, but because the compound interest effect finally has enough capital to work with that the returns themselves become substantial. This is why financial advisors constantly emphasize the importance of starting early, not because starting in your 20s gives you slightly better returns, but because it gives compound interest the decades it needs to transform modest savings into substantial wealth. And most importantly, it gets you past that $100,000 milestone while you're still young enough to benefit from multiple decades of exponential growth afterward. So what can you actually do to accelerate your journey through this brutal early phase and reach that magical $100,000 milestone faster than the average person who either gives up or never commits to the process in the first place? The most important strategy is to recognize that the path to 100,000 is fundamentally different from the path beyond it. And you need tactics specifically designed for wealth accumulation rather than wealth management, which means prioritizing your savings rate above almost everything else during these critical early years. According to research from the Economic Policy Institute, the median working age household has only about $5,000 in retirement savings, which demonstrates that most people never escape the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle that keeps them from building any meaningful investment base. If you can push your savings rate to 25 or even 30% of your income during your 20s and 30s, you'll compress that timeline to 100,000 dramatically compared to someone saving the often recommended 10 or 15%. And yes, this requires real sacrifice and saying no to purchases that feel important in the moment, but are ultimately just consumption that delays your financial freedom. The math is straightforward but unforgiving. If you save $1,000 per month and earn an 8% average annual return, you'll hit $100,000 in about 6.5 years. But if you can push that to $1,500 per month through side income or expense reduction, you'll reach the same milestone in roughly 4.5 years, shaving off 2 full years of the grind. Another crucial but often overlooked strategy is to focus on increasing your income through career development, side hustles, or entrepreneurship during this phase, rather than obsessing over investment strategies and trying to pick winning stocks. Because the difference between an 8% and a 12% return on $30,000 is only about $1,200 per year, whereas negotiating a $10,000 raise or building a side business that generates $500 per month has a much more significant impact on your timeline. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that workers who change jobs strategically earn approximately 50% more over their lifetime compared to those who stay with one employer, which suggests that career mobility and aggressive income growth should be your primary focus during the journey to 100,000, rather than trying to optimize your asset allocation or chase market-beating returns. You also need to protect yourself from the lifestyle inflation that naturally occurs as your income grows, because research shows that the average person increases their spending by about 50 cents for every additional dollar they earn, which means that without intentional systems to capture raises and bonuses directly into investments, your timeline to 100,000 just keeps extending indefinitely no matter how much more money you make. Setting up automatic transfers that increase annually or whenever you get a raise ensures that your future self doesn't sabotage the progress your current self is working so hard to achieve. The truth that nobody wants to hear is that reaching $100,000 invested requires you to live significantly below your means during a period of life when you probably have the energy and youth to enjoy spending more freely, and there's no way around this uncomfortable trade-off between present enjoyment and future security. But here's the perspective shift that makes the sacrifice worthwhile. Once you cross that $100,000 threshold, your wealth starts compounding so aggressively that you actually can loosen up your budget and enjoy your money more, because your investment returns are doing more of the work. That same $100,000, if left invested for another 25 years at 10% returns, grows to over $1 million without you adding another single dollar, which demonstrates the absurd power of compound interest once you've established that critical mass of capital. So the question isn't whether the journey to 100,000 is difficult, because it absolutely is. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or had significant financial advantages they're not acknowledging. But rather whether you're willing to endure several years of being financially out of sync with your peer group in order to experience decades of exponential wealth growth that most people never achieve. If you found this perspective on building wealth valuable and you want more content that cuts through the financial noise to give you the real mathematics and psychology of getting rich, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss future videos that could genuinely change your financial trajectory.